There are places in America where the road simply ends, where the last painted line fades into gravel, and beyond that, there is nothing but forest, silence, and the cold, indifferent border between two nations. It is in these forgotten corridors, away from cameras, away from witnesses, away from the ordinary machinery of modern life, where some of the most haunting mysteries begin. This is one of those mysteries. In the early autumn of 2025, a family of 4 crossed from Canada into the state of Montana through one of the most remote border checkpoints in the entire country. A husband, a wife, 2 young children, a rented SUV loaded with luggage and everything that suggests a family in the middle of an ordinary journey. They checked in, they were waved through, and then, somewhere between that checkpoint and the nearest town, a stretch of road less than 40 miles long, they simply ceased to exist. The vehicle was found less than 3 hours later, engine still running, doors unlocked, personal belongings untouched. The children's backpacks sat in the rear seat. A half-eaten bag of crackers rested on the center console. A stuffed animal lay on the floor. There were no signs of struggle, no broken glass, no blood, no tire marks suggesting a rapid departure, no footprints leading into the surrounding wilderness that investigators could confidently trace. 4 people had vanished from a running vehicle on a road with no exits, no intersecting paths, and no logical explanation for where they could have gone. The responding officers from the local sheriff's department initially treated it as a mechanical stop gone wrong, perhaps a medical emergency, perhaps a confused family that had wandered off the road looking for help. But what happened next shocked investigators. A full sweep of the surrounding terrain, conducted over 3 consecutive days with search dogs, helicopters, and a volunteer team numbering over 200 people, produced absolutely nothing. Not a footprint, not a discarded item, not a single trace of the family beyond the abandoned vehicle itself. The case was immediately escalated. Federal investigators arrived within 72 hours. Border security agencies on both sides of the line were notified. The family's last confirmed movements were reconstructed with painstaking care. Cell phone records were subpoenaed. Toll data was analyzed. The rental car's onboard GPS was downloaded and reviewed. Everything pointed to a normal, unremarkable journey right until the moment the vehicle stopped. And then, nothing. The GPS trail ended. The phones went dark. The family disappeared from the digital record as completely as they had disappeared from the physical world. The timeline didn't make sense. Investigators noted something deeply troubling early in the inquiry. The checkpoint records showed the family's vehicle had been processed and cleared at exactly the time their paperwork suggested. The officer on duty that day, a veteran of more than 14 years at that post, remembered them clearly. He described a calm family, no signs of distress. The father had asked about road conditions ahead. The mother had been turned in her seat, talking quietly to the children. Nothing, he said, felt wrong. And yet, within less than 90 minutes of that interaction, the vehicle sat alone on the road, with the engine running and 4 lives erased from it. Someone knew more than they admitted. As investigators widened their circle, something unsettling emerged. A local resident living in a cabin approximately 4 miles from the recovery site reported hearing what she described as a second vehicle, large, possibly a truck, moving slowly along the access road, running parallel to the main highway, sometime in the window when the family's disappearance likely occurred. She had not thought much of it at the time. Hunters and loggers used that road occasionally. But when she was shown a map and asked to mark the location, investigators realized the access road she described ran directly alongside the stretch of highway where the family's vehicle had been found, directly alongside it. close enough that a person standing at the tree line would have had a clear line of sight to anyone stopped on the shoulder. She had not seen the vehicle clearly, she could not give a description, but she was sure of one thing: it had stopped, idled for several minutes, and then moved on in the direction of the Canadian border. The lead was never conclusively followed. The access road yielded no tire evidence of value. The logging company that used the road had no record of operations that weekend. Local hunters contacted through licensing records could account for their whereabouts. The second vehicle, if it had existed at all, had left no verifiable trace behind. Weeks passed, then months. The investigation produced theories, and there was no shortage of them. Some investigators focused on the possibility of a targeted abduction, raising uncomfortable questions about whether the family had been followed deliberately, whether someone had tracked their crossing and known the stretch of road where contact could be made without witnesses. Others pointed to the isolated geography and questioned whether a catastrophic medical event, carbon monoxide from the vehicle perhaps, could explain why 4 people might have wandered from their car in a confused state and succumbed to the elements before searchers could reach them. But the terrain had been searched. The search had been thorough. No remains were found. One crucial detail was overlooked in the initial days of the investigation and only surfaced weeks later when a data technician re-examined the rental car's interior sensors. The vehicle's internal temperature log, a passive data recorder most drivers never know exists, showed a brief but significant drop in cabin temperature at approximately the midpoint of the missing window. A door had opened, possibly 2 doors, and then, roughly 4 minutes later, the log showed the doors had been closed again. Someone had gotten into that car, or someone had helped 4 people out of it. The data was inconclusive on its own. It could not tell investigators who had opened those doors. It could not tell them whether the occupants had left willingly or under duress. It could not tell them where they had gone or what waited for them on the other side. But it shattered the earlier assumption that the family had simply walked away on their own. Something happened at that vehicle, something deliberate, something organized, and it took less than 4 minutes. Federal agencies spent the following months quietly pursuing what few threads remained. Cross-border communication between U.S. and Canadian authorities intensified. Databases were searched. Tip lines received hundreds of calls, most of them dead ends, a handful requiring follow-up that ultimately led nowhere. The family's backgrounds were examined thoroughly: finances, relationships, travel history, professional connections. Nothing surfaced to suggest they had enemies, outstanding debts, or involvement in anything that might make them a target. They were, by every available measure, exactly what they appeared to be: an ordinary family on an ordinary trip. And yet, they were gone. By early 2026, with the investigation still officially open but operationally stalled, the case had taken on the particular suffocating quality that cold cases carry when the evidence runs dry but the questions refuse to live. Investigators who worked the early days of the inquiry spoke privately about the feeling the case left behind. Not confusion exactly, but something closer to a wound that wouldn't close. Cases without bodies are among the hardest to carry. There is no finality, no boundary between the possible and the impossible. Every scenario remains technically alive. The checkpoint officer who had waved the family through gave an interview to a regional publication in spring of 2026. He said he thought about them often. He said he replayed that morning regularly, searching the memory for something he might have missed, some signal of distress he had failed to read. He found nothing. They had seemed fine, he said. They had seemed like any other family, heading somewhere they were looking forward to being. And perhaps that is the most unnerving truth in all of this. Not that something terrible happened in a dark and remote place. Terrible things happen in dark and remote places, and we have learned, however reluctantly, to absorb that knowledge. What refuses to be absorbed, what lingers in the mind long after the details fade, is that it happened in the open, in daylight, on a road, at a border crossing staffed by a trained officer with 14 years of experience who saw nothing wrong, in a vehicle equipped with GPS and cell connectivity and passive environmental sensors. All of that, and 4 people still vanished without a trace. As of this writing, the case remains unsolved. No arrests have been made, no bodies have been recovered, no credible explanation has emerged to account for what happened between the checkpoint and the empty road where the car sat running, with the heat on and the crackers on the console and the stuffed animal on the floor. Somewhere the answer exists, buried in a data file nobody has thought to pull, or in the